Hello and welcome. I'm Suma Katauka and you are watching NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top stories. More Palestinian families have fled Gaza City following a night of Israeli shelling on the eastern outskirts. This comes as Gaza deals with the aftermath of deadly strikes. Israeli air raids on Nasser Hospital have killed at least 20 people, including journalists from Reuters, the Associated Press, Al Jazeera, and others. Meanwhile, Israeli tanks and soldiers have been seen near the Gaza border as plumes of smoke rose from the enclave. The Israeli military has reportedly said that its forces have returned to Jabalia to locate weapons, destroy militant tunnels, and strengthen control. Let's listen into what some of the people leaving Gaza has said.
يعني من حد ما نتنياهو أعلن احتلال غزة يوميا حركة نزوح مش طبيعية. يعني امبارح لأول يوم للساعة 11 و11 ونص في الليل ناس نازحين مشحون عربات كرات كله بيطلع من الشمال. واليوم من الصبح يمكن 500 600 عائلة طلعت من هان أقل حاجة. وامبارح آلاف طلعن عائلات. الوضع صعب جدا. واليوم سمعنا يعني وفيش حياة في الشمال. واليوم سمعنا يعني سواء انفجارات الصبح بتخلي الناس غصب عنها
نزحت
تطلع.
معسكر جبالي أكثر من مرة لحد ما الجيش مسكني ورماني على الجنوب في السنة الماضية، وطلعت على رفح، ومن رفح نزحت على الزوايدة، ومن الزوايدة على خان يونس، ومن خان يونس رجعنا على الشمال الحمد لله. رجعنا معسكر جبالي عودوا ضربونا في عدة مرات في عيادة المعسكر معسكر جبالي عيادة الوكالة. بعد عيادة الوكالة نزحنا احتلوا معسكر جبالي وطلعونا معسكر جبالي. نزحت على في بيت صديقي في جبالي النزلة.
Meanwhile, the Israeli Security Cabinet is expected to give the green light for an expanded offensive in Gaza City entirely, which has raised Egypt and Qatar's efforts to try to resume ceasefire talks again. At the same time, Israeli citizens have held nationwide protests demanding the release of hostages and an end to the war in Gaza. Now for this discussion, we are joined by Roxana Levinson. She's a journalist of Israel Diario, joins us live from Israel. Thank you, Roxana, for joining us today. Welcome to NewsX World. Now, looking at the increasing voices inside of Tel Aviv, what role do domestic protests in Israel play in influencing the current government and military decisions?
Well, people, especially the family members, the families of the hostages, are expecting the protests, especially in days like today or last Sunday, to really make an impact and press the government to accept the deal that is on the table. As the chief of staff or of the army, Eyal Samir, said himself this week, it's on the table, we need to take it. So the hostages are dying. It's not sure now how many hostages are alive. They were supposed to be 20, and the American president talked in the last hours about 18, because he said that maybe 2 of them are not alive anymore. They are in a very bad condition, being starved and tortured. So people are expecting that the presence of thousands of Israelis in the streets will be enough pressure for the government to accept the deal in front of the pressure that are making the extreme right part of the coalition. They are saying openly that if Netanyahu goes for it, if he stops the war at this stage, so he will not have anymore a government, a coalition, and we will go for elections. And this is what Netanyahu is trying to avoid. That's why families of the hostages are accusing him of doing things moved by political interests and by political survival, and not by the survival of the hostages.
And Roxanne, do you think that Netanyahu is more pressed or worried about losing coalition in his government than about the lives of hostages at this moment?
It's not about what I think. The majority of the population in Israel thinks that Netanyahu is more interested by his own political interest than by the deal, and that he is not interested in stopping the war, because this, as I said, will stop his own government. And all that because of his trials and his problems and complications with justice, which he can manage much better being the prime minister and not just a simple citizen. So he is trying to push and to go on, continue with the war as much as he can. Meanwhile, he is having also the support of the American government, but even Netanyahu himself and his top advisor, Ron Dermer, the Minister of Strategic Affairs, are aware of the fact that the American support has a limited time. Donald Trump's patience is starting to finish. So he will have to make a decision, and maybe even today, because the cabinet, as you said, is now discussing what we will do in the next future.
Thank you very much, Roxanne, for sharing that insight. Please stay with us as we come back to you for our next discussion as well. Now, the European Union has condemned Israel's attack on the Nasser Hospital in the Gaza Strip, calling it completely unacceptable. The deadly airstrike, which occurred on Monday, killed at least 20 people, including 5 journalists. Let's listen in to what EU spokesperson has said.
The killing of 5 journalists, 4 health workers, and a number of civilians in Gaza yesterday by an Israeli strike, which targeted the Nasser Hospital, leaving at least 20 people killed, is completely unacceptable. Civilians and journalists must be protected under international law. There have been too many fatalities in this conflict. It must end now. Civilians in Gaza have been suffering for far too long and far too much, and it is time to break the cycle of violence and of suffering. We reiterate our call on Israel to respect international humanitarian law and to ensure that these attacks are investigated, noting the statement by the Israeli authorities that a thorough investigation will be conducted.
Now, for this discussion, we go back to our guest, Roxana Levinson. She's a journalist of Israel Diario. Joins us live from Israel. Thank you, Roxana, for staying with us. Now, what implications might the EU's condemnation of the recent attacks have on its diplomatic relations with Israel?
Well, Israel is still investigating what really happened in Khan Younis, in Nasser Hospital. We don't know, we don't have publicly all the details. I can tell you what the army released, what we do know. The army's investigation is set to include the question who approved the attack, the strike, besides the division commander, which is not a senior officer, as we know. This kind of attacks on sensitive places as a hospital requires the approval of even of the chief of staff, and then is being investigated how the decision was made and how on the ground it happened. What the Israeli army said this morning is also that among the people killed at Nasser Hospital, there were some terrorists of Hamas that it's now known for certain that they belong to Hamas. And the Israeli army has all the personal details of these terrorists of Hamas that were operating in Nasser Hospital. And we know also that because some hostages that were released told when they came back to Israel that they were held in Nasser Hospital, that they were taken to the hospital in ambulances, hidden in ambulances, and held there in the Nasser Hospital, and that also other hospitals like Shifa were used as a command and control center by Hamas. Anyway, the chief of staff, Eyal Samir, ordered an immediate and complete investigation to understand really what happened. And the spokesperson of the army said that the IDF don't attack intentionally and planned civilians. They don't target civilians.
And Roxana, do you see, now going back to our previous discussion, do you still see a realistic path where internal dissent could alter the trajectory of the current Israeli military strategy?
I really, and unfortunately, don't see that. Even though the Prime Minister Netanyahu has been in a kind of zigzag, especially the last days, saying that he already gave the green light to the operation, the major operation, military operation in Gaza City, and at the same time saying that he will send the negotiations team to nobody knows where, because it's not anymore Doha or Cairo. So he's saying one thing and the contrary at the same time, and nobody knows really what's going to happen. And especially the families of the hostages are really confused and are really desperate. So we don't know. We see that the army is making all the preparation and calling the reservists, thousands of reservists, and at the same time, the chief of the army is saying that they don't agree, that now the agreement is on the table to release hostages, and then after that, maybe we will come back to war or not, but now is the time to release hostages and finish the war.
Yes, indeed. Thank you very much, Roxana Levinson, for joining us and sharing your insight as a journalist from Israel. Thank you very much. Now we move on to Russia, Ukraine. An attack on a coal mine in eastern Ukraine's Donetsk region has left 1 miner dead and 3 injured, Ukraine's largest energy company, DTEK, has said. The mine located near the front line suffered damage to buildings and equipment, and 146 miners were trapped underground as rescue operations still continue. Russia has intensified its offensive in eastern Ukraine, where most of the country's coal mines are located. Ukrainian forces say they have stabilized the front near Dobropilya after Russian troops pushed towards the main defensive line. In northeastern Ukraine, firefighters dealt with blasts and fires in Sumy and Bezdrivka, injuring 2 people and damaging residential buildings. Meanwhile, Russia's defense ministry showed video of new recruits signing military contracts in St. Petersburg. Eligible men aged 18 to 65 receive contracts with a lump sum and monthly salary and will be deployed across the Leningrad military district, including Ukraine. Now for this discussion, we're joined by Ross Feingold. He's a political analyst, joins us live from Taipei. Thank you very much, Ross, for joining us again. Good to see you. Now looking at targeting of critical infrastructure again, and the increasing targeting of critical infrastructure in both sides, from both sides, are we seeing signs of a drawn-out war of attrition, do you think?
Well, the war of attrition has been going on pretty much for most of the past 3+ years, ever since Russia's initial offensive failed. But we know what this is mostly about, and that's positioning on both sides, Ukraine as well as Russia, for the best arrangement possible should there be a ceasefire, whether that's a short-term ceasefire or a long-term ceasefire. Both sides want to have control of as much territory as possible, and they want the other side to know that their military capabilities remain very, very real going into any ceasefire negotiation. So as much as the international community, including President Trump, wants Russia to stop doing these kinds of attacks, and probably also wants Ukraine to do so as well, although most of the calls are on Russia to stop doing this. It's clear that Russia is not going to stop doing it prior to a ceasefire. And to be fair to Ukraine, why should they? I mean, they're being attacked. Their civilian infrastructure is being attacked. Their civilians are being killed by Russian attacks. Why shouldn't they also use their own military capabilities to counterattack? And that's what they're doing, and they see no reason to stop. Although, again, they might come under some pressure prior to ceasefire negotiations as well to stop doing these kinds of attacks. But for the moment, both sides are going to continue these kinds of attacks, and it's all a prelude to what kind of deal they could reach in ceasefire negotiations.
And Ross, from your analysis, how do you think how prepared is Ukraine and its allies for that scenario?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. Ukraine is so reliant on international assistance. They need weapons, they need cash. Previously, the United States was providing a large portion of that. Now, the U.S. policy under President Trump is not to provide weapons or cash, and it's for the Europeans to buy weapons from the United States and provide those to Ukraine. So this ultimately still links to what kind of ceasefire arrangement will be made. And then we come to the really key question is, if there is some kind of ceasefire, while the ceasefire is in effect, what kind of support will the European countries continue to give Ukraine? Will they continue to give Ukraine a large number of weapons, a large amount of cash, so that Ukraine can maintain its defense against any future Russian attack? And at the moment, that's an unknown.
And Ross, going back a few days at about the recent POWs that happened in Ukrainian Independence Day, do you think that was just for morale, or that was just to show, or do you think this will continue and it will only be POWs? Do you think we will see any breakthrough towards ceasefire among the parties?
Interesting is that in the recent rounds of face-to-face talks between Russia and Ukraine, when they are in the room, they're able to exchange POWs. And both sides have their political needs to be able to achieve that and to say that they have the ability to retrieve POWs from the other side. So of course, as part of any ceasefire agreement, there would have to be a release of all the POWs that both sides, or that each side holds. So it's the issue with POWs, again, it's a sensitive domestic political issue. There's a lot of pressure domestically that President Zelensky or President Putin face to bring POWs home, and it'll be an important part of any ceasefire negotiation. But one of the challenges there is Ukraine's position is, we don't just want our POWs back, we want the kidnapped children back, and it remains to be seen whether or not Russia will agree to that.
Thank you very much. We'll be keeping an eye on that too. Thank you very much, Ross Weingold, for joining us and sharing your insight. Now we move on to Asia. Myanmar junta's airstrike on rebel-held town in hunger-hit west has left at least 12 people dead in an overnight bombing. The junta holds just 3 of 17 townships in coastal Rakhine as it struggles to regain territory ahead of a disputed election it plans to launch in areas under its control this December. Myanmar's military has blockaded Rakhine state amid clashes with ethnic fighters in the multi-front civil war that has gripped the country since the junta's 2021 coup, ousting the democratic government. The Arakan Army, known as AA, a local ethnic armed group, has vowed to prevent the junta's election, set to begin in phases from December 28, from taking place in areas under its control. An Arakan Army spokesperson has said that the dead included 5 children, while another 20 people were wounded. Both the military and the Arakan Army have been accused of atrocities in Rakhine, where about 20% of the population has been displaced by this conflict. As per reports, these 57% of families in central Rakhine cannot meet basic food needs, up from 33% in December last year, with conditions likely much worse in more remote areas. Now for this discussion, we are joined by Mark Sutherland. He's a geopolitical analyst, joins us live from London. Thank you very much, Mark, for joining us. Good to see you. Now, what impact might the junta's planned December elections have on this conflict dynamics?
Super good to join you. It's extremely, it's extremely sad, this situation, to say the least, especially when there's various reports saying that the junta is, pouring 500-pound bombs at various points onto civilians. This and it's, as you mentioned in your reporting, this coup in 2021, when the National League of Democracy was voted in 2015 with 67 seats, and the junta, the army, still holding on to a lot of power of 25 seats. But that democratic process meant that they got a big majority. And it's important to say this because there is such a long history of socialism, communism, and very sadly within that over the last 75 years plus. But also we've just seen this, there was an earthquake at the beginning of the year as well. This is absolutely tragic. Various reports of, civilians on the move in a number of areas. And also, as you've said, they need shelter, there's food, they need provision, and they need help. But this really does show something when the army seems that it can drop 500-pound bombs on civilians and then saying, right, we're going to have this election. As I often say, and I don't mean it rudely or don't mean it as a brush off, again, this is an extremely complex area, complex part of the world. People have fought for democracy, people have fought to then be able to have an economic policy. If you look at Mises.org, where it talks about establishing, private companies, people being able to then be in charge of their own destiny instead of looking at socialism, a more cooperative structure and mindset, which is what the army has then gone back to. So on the one hand, it's turning around and saying, we are going to hold elections, and then it's throwing munitions around that it shouldn't. And then we have this liberation army coming in, and as you reported, turning around and saying, well, we're going to hold the town and the villages that we have taken. As I say, there's a long history, and it is very, very sad. And in regard to the fact that it's totalitarian, it's from a military junta central positioning. And as I've said, when you then recently have had nearly 5 years of democracy are wanting to push towards that, when the National League of Democracy won over 67 seats, it's extremely sad, and particularly with the civilians suffering in the way that they are at the moment.
Yes, it is really sad, the situation, and given all the reasons that you have mentioned, now looking back at Arakan Army's vow to block the elections, how do you think, how likely is it the process to be seen as legitimate, both domestically and internationally?
Well, you're asking an extremely good question, and the big question should be asked is why does the army think it's perfectly acceptable, as I say, of underlining another sort of fourth time, to drop these munitions onto civilians? I find it rather interesting in another theatre where they're constantly accusing a certain army of behaving where it does whatever it can to then make sure that civilians are taken out of the way, and that's in regard to the Israel situation. So international people that will be inspecting, if they're allowed in to inspect the elections, etc., need to take this very seriously, and voices need to raise over what is going on presently out there. So that we need to watch that. And as you quite rightly say, liberation armies, that particular group turning around saying, no, we're not going to recognize the electoral process in that situation. We always come back to an interesting quote from Stalin that it says it's not who votes that's important, it's who counts the votes. And that is always a concern in these kind of situations when it's led by a military junta that, as we say, had a coup 2021 to then deny the democratic process that had happened in 2015, Asuma.
Yes, thank you very much, Mark Sutherland, for joining us and sharing your insight as a geopolitical analyst. Thank you very much. Now we move on to Africa. Peace talks have resumed between the Democratic Republic of the Congo and the M23 militia in Doha, Qatar. Following recent reports of violence in the Congo's conflict-stricken east, Qatari Foreign Ministry spokesperson Majid Al-Ansari has confirmed both parties are in Doha to discuss the implementation of a July ceasefire agreement. The deal signed in Doha was meant to bring an end to years of fighting that has plagued the region. The talks include key issues like a ceasefire monitoring mechanism and the exchange of prisoners. The Congolese government and M23 had agreed to begin dialogue in August, but both deadlines have passed without finalization. Despite the ceasefire, violence erupted earlier this month, with rights groups reporting ethnically targeted mass killings. Rwanda, which is accused of backing the M23, denies its military involvement, but UN experts have claimed Rwandan forces played a critical role in the militia's offensive. Well, this is all we have time for. We will continue to bring you more news updates from around the world.